I'm going to be running a quick session now with Lord Heseltine, who I think everybody in the room will be very familiar with in his career in politics, which has spanned several decades. Just to leave it at several decades, shall we? But certainly, Lord Heseltine has been involved at the heart of government for many, many years, and through many, many interesting years and interesting developments, changes, and I suppose projects as well. Looking around the room here at people who have been involved in many of the projects that he's been driven and helped to drive forward through to reality. I'm going to have lots of questions for Lord Heseltine, based largely around his recent report, which came out a couple of years ago, called No Stone Unturned. Being a journalist, I've always got lots of questions. But I'm also very keen to hear your questions. And I think, Lord Heseltine, you're also very, very keen to hear some questions from the floor, from the people who actually are trying to, I suppose, get through the process of government to make these kind of projects happen. So I will come to you. So do make sure you've got questions ready. There's microphones in the room. And if there aren't any questions, I'll put people on the spot, so don't worry about that. So, Lord Heseltine, you were commissioned in, I think, March 2012 to actually look at what we could do in response to what you described as the worst economic crisis in modern times. As I said, you've had a career in government that has, or it continues, actually, your career, it continues to embrace, I suppose, the whole concept of business efficiency and actually taking action and helping government to perform better. Can we start then, I suppose, with reflections on some things in your report? One of the things you said, and I think it reflects on what was said a bit earlier on in the conference. Government needs a single compelling vision for how wealth can be created. And I suppose, do you think that the current focus that we have on infrastructure, I suppose as outlined this morning by Lord Dighton, do you think that this is the required vision?
I don't think that having a vision for infrastructure is a vision that is sufficiently broad to justify the word vision. Infrastructure is critical, but if you don't have many other aspects of economic growth in place, the infrastructure will not flourish. So I realize in this audience it's a subject of massive concern, but Britain is 20% less productive than America and Germany. Britain's education system produces a lot of kids that are illiterate and innumerate. We could go on. So if you're interested in the subject of economic performance, if you're interested in the subject of getting an economy which is firing on every cylinder, you don't pick on one aspect. You pick on all the aspects, and you try to pursue a coherent strategy of excellence, which adds up to the vision.
Okay, so while we struggle to make decisions over aviation, is it Heathrow, is it Thames, while we struggle to make decisions over energy, whether it's Hinkley Point, whether it's offshore wind, what you're saying is that fundamentally misses the point where you need to start is get your businesses more efficient.
No, I wouldn't even start there. I'd start with the kids. The single most important ingredient, you could argue, is the energy and talent and educational attainments of your younger generation. What can your businesses do if they can't get the people they need? Or indeed have to subsidize them to stay at home on the unemployment queues and do nothing. So I'm always preoccupied in any of these analyses that people pick on the particular thing they're interested in and says, if you get that right, it'll all be all right. I don't believe that. I think that it is much more comprehensive and indeed one of the proposals that I included in my report was a growth council chaired by the Prime Minister. I have my own judgment. There are many, many different ministerial views, but my view is that if you really want this economy to fire on all cylinders, there has to be a culture in Whitehall, right across Whitehall, that is about growth, about maximizing the opportunities and preparing the decisions in a way that asks that basic question: what more can I do? How can this impact? Where's the upside? And that culture doesn't exist. And I think it can only come, frankly, from one place, because there's only one place in this country which can inject that dynamic into Whitehall, and that's Number 10.
Right. And so the conversations you've had, presumably with Number 10 about this, to indicate that that is or isn't going to happen?
Well, they have established a growth council, but it is not yet operating on the scale that I envisaged. But you have to realize that I come from a political party which has very different views about how government should operate. And my certain guess is that this audience will have equally certain views. I'm what I call an interventionist. Have said so in black and white terms. There will be people in this audience who think the job of government is to get off our backs, get rid of red tape, sack a few civil servants, set the thing free. All very interesting. Just no other country is doing it. And I don't, in my own experience, that is interesting, not to be ignored, can play a role, but the idea that it adds up to an industrial strategy just doesn't bear any sort of scrutiny compared with what I know about the way governments and the private sector work.
You talk about enthusing the youth, enthusing the young generation. Of course, over the years, you've been involved in quite a few projects which I suppose you could argue have been enthusing for the Concord, for instance, was a project which in many ways really captured the imagination and drove industries to do things which had never been done before. Do we need a kind of a Concord project of that sort again? Is HS2 a Concord project?
You said a number of things. You see, Concord was not state-of-the-art. Concord took existing technologies and stretched them to the frontier of where they could go. There was no stretch left. The Olympus engine was at the far end of where it could go. And I remember as a minister responsible, I said to civil servants, I said, now look, come on, exactly what you're saying. We've got to sell this thing. We'll get out there and tell them what it's about, enthuse people, vision, all that. And show me all the spin-offs, I said. It isn't just about this aircraft, about this prototype that's flying around the place. There must be lots of technologies that Britain is at the leading edge and all this sort of stuff. And there was awful silence. And they said, well, I'm very sorry to tell you, Minister, that the problem is there isn't much, because it is not state-of-the-art. Already the Americans were working on stealth technologies, were working on much faster speeds, on all that. So it was a wonderful, fine gesture, but it wasn't what people thought.
But it did, you must accept, it did capture imagination. It did enthuse people.
Well, let's take that as an, I mean, maybe it did, and certainly for some it did. I have no doubt about that. But you see, when I think about this, I say to myself, what is the relationship between the job creators and schools? What is the amount of careers advice that is being given to the young generation at school by the people who are going to employ them or not? And there are quite a lot of schools in this country which won't let the private sector into the schools. They won't actually let them in, because the culture within the schools is that the private sector is not quite the sort of thing we want to do. There are quite a lot of schools that don't have any private sector governors. And there are plenty of places where there is no private sector careers advice. There are plenty of places where there were no day sort of courses or mentoring visits by kids to see what the local industrial scene is like. Now, that is incomparably more important than any perhaps misleading vision from seeing a plane flying around.
So it's the engagement of projects such as Thames Tideway out there, and the engagement of projects?
No. It is the engagement of the young people in their careers, right, and where they're going to make the most of what they're doing at school, and to give them the enthusiasm to learn more. And they should look at what's happening in the Chinese schools, or the Korean schools, or dozens of other nations, where they are producing generation of energetic, talented, numerate, literate kids. And that's the competition of tomorrow.
Well, of course, the schools are all they are out across the entire nation. I suppose one of the things that you've said in your report is that very clearly that big government doesn't work. We need to strengthen the regions. We need the support of central government.
No, but wait a minute. The reason why the schools are being centralized is because localism has not delivered. And this audience comes from all over the country. Everybody here knows or can look on a computer and know where the SINC schools are in their area. It's not rocket science. It's all published. All the schools with bad results, they're all known, they're all there. But we walk on the other side of the road. The local authorities look on the other side of the road. The governors listen to the parents who says this is all the cuts or whatever it may be. And the numbers of authorities or boards of governors who are really driving the quality standards locally is not sufficient. There is no socio-economic grouping that defines under-attainment in education.
One of the issues you raise in the report is because there is an over-reliance on central government, perhaps, whether it's education or whether it's investment in infrastructure locally. And I suppose what you said is that there was starting to be the first steps towards embracing a more local agenda. I suppose looking 2 years on, are we moving down that path? Or are we?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. But I think it's everyone here is entitled to their historic perspective of what happened. But what I said in my report, which is what I believe happened, is that Britain brilliantly seized the first mover advantage of the Industrial Revolution. The 18th and 19th centuries, we became the world's dominant military power. We owned 2/3 of the world's surface, and we managed the greatest empire the world has ever and ever will see. It was done not by London, although they played a part, but by the great industrial cities, Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle, Birmingham, they're all well-established names. The cost of that process in human squalor was unacceptable. The people flocked from the land to the towns, the conditions were appalling. And so democracy, quite understandably and quite rightly, demanded that the condition of the people be addressed. Who would object? But what did that actually mean? Well, it meant, first of all, equalization, because the poor areas couldn't afford the standards that people wanted, and why should you have higher standards in rich areas and less standards in others? So you had a massive recycling of tax from the more prosperous to generalization. You had a replacement of the buccaneers that built the cities by councillors and officials distributing the cash. Distributing the cash not in the wealth-creating process, but in the social levels of entitlement that a civilized society democratically determined. That, over 200 years, changed the entire culture of what drove the great cities. But it did something else. The recycling of the money had to be done by somebody. And is in place of the buccaneers who were wealth-driven and Manchester-centered, you got officials and ministers functionally preoccupied. Environment, housing, health, you name it, the great departments of state. Monopolies, functionally divided, allocating cash, telling them how to spend the money. Now, you think of that 200 years, and it is unprecedented anywhere else in the world. No other country you can think of has this monopoly in London.
Yeah. Well, you say local leadership built the UK, and I suppose if you speak, I spoke to Sir Albert Bohr in Birmingham recently. He told me, and the quote is, Birmingham would benefit for more freedom from central government. He also said the problem with the UK is that it's so London-centric. It means that the economies of Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, they underperform compared to their international comparators.
True.
I mean, he's right. I mean,
yeah, he's right. But Albert is leader of Birmingham. He's talking as a local authority leader. Mm-hmm. And he, I don't think, would disagree with this, although I'm not putting words in his mouth. The local authorities are not in the business of wealth creation. They are there to distribute the social underpinning of society. Very necessary, very desirable, but that's not the same thing as trying to drive the economy. Now, the answer that this government believes, and I'm not a minister, but I have played some part in it, is the creation of the local enterprise partnerships. And that's why I'm able to say to you, yes, I think the local agenda is now coming up the political ladder. It's not up here, but it's off the deck. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a competitive process in which both parties will bid the process up. And I think it will mean that we are now getting, for the first time in my experience, economic concepts based on local judgments by public and private sector people as to what they really want, as opposed to what someone tells them they should have.
Well, let's talk about local enterprise partnerships. You talk about the devolution of funding from central government is critical, but I suppose when you get to the LEPs, you do find that there's a spectrum of performance, and I suppose a spectrum of skills in there. How do we ensure that they have the right leadership strength to do what is necessary with that devolved funding?
You make them compete.
You make them compete.
Yeah, because you see, this functional process that I describe, worthy people, decent people, making the judgments, but what do they know? How can they know what Colchester or Bermondsey or wherever actually needs? So they do formulae. Mm-hmm. And they say they've got so many old people, so they get so many units of cash. They've got so many kids in the school, they get so many units of cash. So many miles of road, they get so many units of cash. That's how they do it. What else can they do? And so if you change the thing round and you say to the 39 local enterprise partnerships, look, this is the sort of money that we're already spending through local government. Now you tell us how you'd have spent it if we took your advice as opposed to this imposition. And by the way, you're competing with 38 other LEPs. So this is a quality judgment as well as an absolute sum.
I mean, I understand that that makes people think harder about what they need, harder about how they can make the money work and go further, harder about how they can bring the private sector in. But I suppose it does go back to local politics is driven by characters, is driven by skills and personalities, and you therefore are surely you risk being at the mercy of he who shouts loudest.
Not if you judge the quality of the plan. There's no shouting about it. It's done.
Not even a little bit.
No, I do assure you that because I'm involved in this process. All we look at is the value for money, the gearing, how much they're prepared to put into it, the coherence of the plan, and you then have to, well, let's because of course you're right to ask the question about the quality of the people involved. Well, okay, let's take that head on. There is no magic thing. We cannot conjure up 39 teams of people and say, let them all be Albert Einsteins. So, but what is the contrast? We have got the leaders of virtually every major authority. We have got the vice-chancellor of virtually every university. And we have got the leaders of British industry in England in these local enterprise partnerships. They do their best. The choice is between that group and an official in the Department of Transport working out what the transport view should be, another official, unlinked, working out from the Department of Housing what the housing should be, another official working out what the education should be. They never meet. Only once in my political life have I ever been to a meeting, until this process started, to discuss a place. And that was Liverpool in 1981, after the riots. So if you say to me, is it perfect? No. But I say compare it with what it is with what you've got. Uncoordinated, functional officials, as opposed to the most influential and experienced local people. I know where my money is.
Are there any views on local enterprise partnerships? Is anyone here involved in that would like to raise an issue or put a point particularly about LEPs that they feel is worth challenging what Lord Heseltine says? Yeah, far away, yeah. There's a microphone somewhere. Say who you are and get stuck in.
I ought to respond because you asked a factual question. And for me to sit here and not respond would be very, very unusual. But good afternoon, Lord Heseltine. Robert Huff from Liverpool.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Yeah, yes. So I can certainly endorse what you said. I mean, there's no doubt that...
You're the chairman of the LEP, the Liverpool LEP. Tell them, you know.
Yeah. Thanks for the introduction.
Which LEP is it?
Liverpool,
right,
Liverpool, the finest city.
Yes. Carry on then.
The point is this, that the local growth plan, strategic economic plans, led by the individual LEPs, they have necessitated the requirement to focus on the economic opportunities, our bottom-up position for that particular area, closely examined by local collaboration involving private sector, local authority leaders, in our case, the elected mayor, the Vice-Chancellor University of Liverpool, and identifying those natural distinctive strengths which will drive the economy of the city or region. And those aren't a question of reciting the old favourites of advanced manufacturing. This is low carbon, this is superport, the visitor economy, and the knowledge economy. And they're distinctive, and they play to Liverpool's strengths. So the system, I think, is the best in town. It may not be perfect, but it is the best in town. And what that plan requirement means is that each of us has to examine that plan. It's put forward to Lord Heseltine and to Greg Clark, and it becomes a deal. And we have to fight for every corner. We have to show value for money, leverage, gearing, and so on. I'll just make one final point, if I might. In Liverpool, 3 years ago, there were 39 admissions to courses for hairdressing, compared with 1 for engineering and logistics. 39 for hairdressing. That's because those young people were not given the opportunity to understand the prospects and openings in the wider economy of Liverpool. And it's back to your point, Lord Heseltine, about the teachers, perhaps the parents to a degree, but the children not given the best chance to make the best of their careers. And that is all changing because these courses, and which are now aligned to opportunities in business, exist through our university technical colleges and others.
So we have a success story in Liverpool, but I suppose are there a list of ticks that you can say this is why it's succeeding in Liverpool? Well,
you can't escape the competitive nature of what we've done, and it so happens that I've been involved in Liverpool since 1979, and the whole history of this process, which has culminated in the LEPs, it mirrors the experiences of Liverpool. And I won't go into all the details because people won't know what I'm talking about. But it's public-private partnership, it's competition, it's the officials in London working in close cooperation with the aspirations of local leaders. And including in that coordination are some sharp questions. How do we know that you can carry out this particular program you're putting forward? And there's no use saying because we're good guys and we'll do our best. Liverpool, for example, has just followed Manchester's example and created a combined authority, which means that the individual boroughs that make up the Mersey conurbation have now created an administrative framework. They would never have done that if they'd been left to their own devices. Manchester did it voluntarily, but it took them 20 years to do it. Leeds have now followed suit, so has Sheffield. So this process of saying, look, you can have more power, more discretion, more influence, but you've got to show that you can do the job. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, it is amazing the changes that are taking place as a result of that.
So while we're on the road to the local agenda, there's an awful lot more that needs to be done in many areas before it really embraces and is able to deliver.
I mean, we're in its infancy. Central government has got to change. Mm-hmm. its means of handling this issue. Local government have got to, not local government, local enterprise partners have got to prove that they can deliver. My own view, in many cases, they've got to raise their aspirations. Mm-hmm. There were some wonderful bids that we've had in, but there were some that are not so wonderful. But they may be better by the time that the final discussions have taken place. The competition is an incredible motivation. Mm-hmm. And introducing it into the public sector, in my view, is a game changer.
One of the things which has been top of agenda recently is Lord Dighton's task force, where he's been going to prepare the regions for High Speed 2, to encourage them to think now about what's going to arrive in 2026. And I suppose, what is your advice? Bearing in mind what you've done with LEPs and with the regions, but also, is it as simple as another thing you say in your report, which is we need more mayors? When we're putting in place things such as the London Docklands Development, son of those kind of organisations, the development agencies, is it about having that visionary central leadership in an area?
Well, I'm totally committed to the view that we need unitary authorities, fewer of them, and there should be a direct election for one person to become the executive mayor. Every other country does it. We don't.
Why don't we?
Oh, because all the people who've got an axe to grind cling on to their roles. I mean, it's not very sophisticated. But Liverpool and Bristol and Leicester and of course London have now got mayors, and I believe it's proving a successful experiment, and I think it will come. And there was another part of your question.
Well, organisations such as the
HS2 we're on. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Well, I was talking to Paul about
development corporations.
Yes. Yeah. One thing, I mean, it's not for me to anticipate the bids, but because Greg Clark, the Minister of Cities, has visited every part of the country, and I've visited quite a few, there will be no shortage of take-up of the HS2 opportunity. All the LEPs who are involved, they've got the message. Now, well, of course, most of these LEP plans are published. Robert, your plan is probably in the public sector, isn't it?
Yes.
It's published. You couldn't do anything else, yes. And Liverpool is a beneficiary of HS2, but Crewe and Warrington and Manchester, two that just happened to occur to me, obviously beneficiaries. Birmingham, I mean, they're absolutely all over the place with excitement about it. So it's all happening. Yeah. Paul is quite right to be preoccupied, but this one is really going. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Any questions or points I want to raise about, I suppose, the whole process of the Dighton Task Force, or any issues around that? Anyone got views on that?
Just before we move on from what's just being said, it strikes me that now seems to be the time for a real revisiting and promoting the whole LEP concept and the benefits, because I'm not sure some of what you're talking about has connected with the wider business community. I think for a lot of people it was just the latest in a whole stream of initiatives. It was another one you didn't have the time to get engaged with. And I'm not sure the good news message that you're talking about here has really got out into the wider community at the moment, and it needs a revitalisation to pull in greater support and engagement.
Is that fair to say?
It's 100% right. I totally agree with that. But I think that the announcement of the results of the bidding process in the summer will be a big news story everywhere. And people will think, look at this. This is what happened. Who was responsible? How did they achieve it? Now,
because there's a lot of money at stake.
Oh, there's billions.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes. And a rolling program, year by year, billions. So this is transformational stuff. It's not as much as I asked for, but my God, no one's ever got this much before. So I mean, don't give up. And I believe this figure will rise if it works. So delivery, and we've said this in our many meetings. The first year is 2015-16, in other words, next year. There's $2 billion to be spent in 2015, plus any gearing that comes from it, because we say, well, okay, this is what the government's going to do, what are you going to do? And I mean, I can give you the figures because I know them backwards. London Docklands produced £10 of private money for every £1 of public money. Liverpool Docklands, at the same time, £1.50 of private money for every £1 of public money. The Regional Growth Fund, of which I was the advisory chairman, £5 of private money for every £1 of public money. I'm not going to give a figure for the local enterprise partnerships. All I know is that the government money to be spent in 15-16 is $2 billion. We will see what the additionality is when we can see it.
But the reality also, it gives a focus for that, and it devolves it from government to where it's needed in a much more effective and efficient way.
Yes, but don't see it as so absolute. I mean, this is money that would have been spent locally anyway. Mm-hmm. You know, there'll be lots of transport schemes. But instead of this being a transport scheme which connects A and B, somebody would have said, if we get this scheme, it will enable us to release 10 acres of derelict land, and we've got a house builder who's going to put houses on it. So it's connectivity. There will be ideas where if we can develop this particular facility, we will develop a technical training associated with it. There'll be a starter business unit associated with it. It's thinking collectively about what you as business people would do if it was your money. And indeed, I always say to the LEP people, look, people like me are going to try and make these decisions, but it's your money. So don't waste everybody's time bidding for something that if it came before your board of directors, you'd laugh to scorn, because there are plenty of people sitting in the centre who are going to say just that. This is a load of rubbish, you know, this is special pleading, this is someone trying to get the gravy train for whatever it is. We know all that, you know, so it won't work. And they may try it in the first year, not many of them will in my experience, but they may, but then they won't win. And next year, they won't try it.
But people in this room ought to know right here and now where their LEP is, how to get involved and how to influence and make sure that it is battling for.
That's just to find out. Yeah. How many here have never heard of a LEP?
That's a good start.
Thank God for that. Well, I mean, that's all right. That's okay. I mean, that's enough for the time being.
Okay. One of the things, we're going to move...
No, there's one.
Rod, is your hand up because you don't know what you heard of a LEP? No, far away. Question there.
I'm putting my hand up because I'd like to ask a question.
Go on then.
Lord Heseltine, you're extolling the virtues of the business process of making decisions as being the way forward. Most of us in this room are engaged in infrastructure.
Yeah.
The life cycle of an infrastructure project is, shall we say, 10 to 50 years. The life cycle of business process tends to be about 3, unless you're investing in oil or something like that. There is a difference, and there are many business people who don't understand the process of making a very long-term decision. And I feel that sometimes we are looking to rely on a process that doesn't relate to the long-term nature of what we're involved in.
Well, look, the danger is generalizations, isn't it? I mean, energy is really at the forefront of what you're talking about, perhaps airports as well, maybe rail. But it would be wrong to say that there is no expertise. I mean, after all, we've been making rail decisions and airport decisions for a long time. We may not have made as many as we'd like or make them as quickly as you would like, but we make them. So there are people around. What I'm really talking about is the dynamic of where it all starts. Does it come by some whiz kid up here, or does it come from down here? Now, the truth is, of course, that a lot of things can come from down here, but in many of the things in which you're interested, the high strategic issues of road, rail, airport, they have got to come as part of a national plan. But if you, I mean, it's just come up on the case of HS2. You draw a line on a map called HS2, you've got all the connectivities and all the regenerative processes that flow, and there's a much bigger local input into that. So it is, this is not absolutism, this is partnership, a different quality of partnership between what government must properly do and what local people can contribute.
Is government getting better at making difficult decisions? And we see the Davies Commission for aviation as we're trying to get through those difficult decisions. Is it getting better compared to?
I think it's impossible to have an answer to a question like that. Who knows? How can you possibly know whether government is getting better or worse in a situation?
Well, because it takes less time to get through the process of idea to delivery, I suppose.
Well, yeah, but that doesn't, it may be, you know, that doesn't, you're talking about the quality of the decision. It may be that taking a bit longer gets you a better decision. I mean, everyone you talk to about this will have their pet scheme which took too long, and then therefore the whole system is rotten. And I don't blame them, that's how I work too. But if you ask me a general question, am I prepared to say what I would say is this country is not strategically well placed. That I do believe. We don't. There are just a lot of people who, I think I opened my comments by saying, a lot of people who think that if you get off our backs and get rid of red tape and all that, it'll all be better. Well, actually, it's rubbish. I mean, if you actually think about this industry, I mean, you wouldn't exist without government, you know?
But you did help to, or you were instrumental in making HS1 happen. You've been instrumental in the past in making a lot of big projects happen.
I know.
Are there lessons that we should be learning from that process to get HS2 to happen?
Well, no, HS2 is fine. I mean, that is going ahead. It's a highly controversial situation, and the parliamentary processes are what they are, but it's on its way. I've got no complaint at all. Indeed, I very much support it. HS1, well, you know the story, and many people won't know the story. I was involved. I was, I think, Environment Secretary, and I got word that the channel link to London, which British Rail had designed and the Ministry of Transport supported, was going to come in through Waterloo. And I said, no, I don't like that. I knew about the Ove-Arup scheme, which was to come in over the Thames and through Stratford into King's Cross and St Pancras. And I thought that the regenerative opportunities of that are hugely more important and mustn't be ignored. So I gate-crashed the meeting and took the issue to the Prime Minister, who, I'm delighted to tell you, agreed with me. And so the thing came in as it did, and Ove-Arup got the scheme. But I mean, if you really want to sort of, as I tell the story, I find it difficult to believe. The argument I used to John Major, which was conclusive, was about regeneration. I said, if you do this, this is another major opportunity to grasp the whole of that East London corridor. Mm-hmm. And John agreed. So we changed the policy.
But fast forward to today.
Just a minute. I know, okay. I've got to absolutely get this over. When they completed HS1 and sold it to the Canadian Pension Fund, they agreed that the train wouldn't stop at Stratford, which was the whole point.
Well, which brings me to Thames Gateway, because of course you've also been driving and trying to make that happen for a long while. Are you supportive of Boris Johnson's efforts to make that whole area blossom with a new Heathrow in the estuary down there?
I'm not supportive or critical. I tell you, my position is very simple. The idea that I've got the capability of making a judgment about where you put a third London airport or a third runway is just ridiculous. I mean, it would just be out of the air, good idea, let's have a new airport. It means nothing. So my view has been, it sounds cowardly, but it's responsible, that until the Davis Commission recommends, I will have no view. Am I against Boris? No, I'm not against Boris. I think it's an imaginative scheme. I like imaginative schemes. But would I be prepared to stand up and say, I back it? No, I won't. And I've said this to Boris because I don't have the capacity to analyze the arguments. So I think my own... everyone in this room will believe we should get on with it. I believe we should get on with it. But I also understand the politics.
A few more minutes left. Are there any questions that people want to put to? Yep.
I love the idea of the LEPs, and I've been learning a lot about LEPs today. You've talked about pet subjects. A pet subject that we discussed this afternoon for this audience is how we think we're getting in a bit of a muddle with regard to energy. And you've got a room full of fantastic firms, fantastic people who probably have the solutions, but we seem to have an impasse in encouraging decisions to be made to get those solutions on track quickly. Can you, with your history of achieving things in this, give us some tips about what we should do as ACE or as firms to move this so that we actually get solutions coming rather than discussing the problems?
Yes, what I think you should concentrate on is your negotiations with Paul Dighton over the mechanisms to get private finance behind these projects. And we all know the world is awash with money. And it's institutional money, and it's Middle Eastern money, and Russian, and God knows. But it doesn't matter. There's a huge wall of money out there looking for somewhere to go. What is missing is workable schemes, and the place that you should concentrate on is the Treasury. I got deeply involved with this issue a few months ago, and it became quite apparent to me that the money is there is willingness there by the institutions, but there is not the mechanism to get the money from the private sector into these schemes. Now, the only way to unlock that is the Treasury. Let me just say this in defense of the Treasury. What the institutions want is risk-free equity. They'll put their money in as long as there's no risk. Well, the government can always borrow money cheaper than that. So, I mean, you'll know the arguments as well as I do. They want to take the construction risk out of the schemes and all that sort of thing. All quite understandable from a self-interested point of view and a trustee of a pension fund. But there are... Well, it's a question of negotiation and keeping at it and breaking through. Everybody knows the money's there. Everyone knows there's huge opportunities that need money. And the Chancellor himself has said this. Well, everything I've just said has been said by the Chancellor.
But one of the things you say is that it needs a major rationalisation of trade associations. I mean, is the problem that the ACE's voice is lost in too big a noise of too many other trade associations?
Well, we got three business associations. I am very critical of the way in which, in this country, the private sector organizes itself. I'm critical of the trade associations. There are 3,000 of them. And you pay for all of those. It's your money. And they're weak. They are driven by, frankly, too often the slowest ship in the convoy. They turn up in Whitehall with the latest whinge. And everybody knows this. And that's why they don't carry a great deal of weight. What we need is less, more powerful trade associations that are prepared to have an adult dialogue about what this country needs. So let me take the most important of them all, productivity. How is it that British industry is 20% less productive than Germany and America? Mm-hmm. Just think of the prize if we could change that.
Okay. We're running right out of time. Is that a very quick question, Rod?
The fact is that if you take a very major infrastructure project, at a certain stage you can set up a company, and the work you do in that company, you can finance it because at the end of the bit of work, it's got a value. But that doesn't arrive until you've done some upfront work at the beginning.
Yeah.
And there is a stage in a major infrastructure project that the government has got to do the paying for some studies. And our problem at the moment is that those studies are not really being done.
Yeah, look, I fully understand that point. But,
yes.
but this is, I mean, and you're on to a very important point, and this is, after all, an important trade association. But these issues, you've just got to work on them. You've got to organize yourselves. You must talk to MPs. You must raise it in the press. You must make a fuss until the matter is resolved. The Chancellor said he wants it resolved. It's in the public statement. You know, you just get the executives or get consultants or whatever it is to really bang on the doors. It's a win-win for this country. But just another point, now I'm here and I've got a captive audience.
Carry on, yep.
No. You see, one of the things you could do in this organization, where is world excellence? Now, who knows what's good in the world? Who knows where other people are doing well and getting on? Now, there's no industry that knows more than you, because all over the world, you are actually, many of you, doing the leading edge, the cutting edge of other countries' ingenuity. Mm-hmm. Write to me. Tell me where they are.
Okay.
Just don't let them get away with it.
No. Well, I think they will commit. Final point to finish on, and I will make sure that they do write you in with all their ideas. Be afraid. Final point. 1 year to go to. It's a trailed general election. What should we expect? The first time we've known exactly when the general election is going to happen. Should we expect government to shut down? Should we expect what should we expect?
Well, I've never known a government shut down or shut up, if that's the other alternative.
Well, will there be a hiatus of decisions? No. What should we be expecting?
No. I mean, no. I mean, that just doesn't happen. No government sort of stops governing in anticipation of an election. Mm-hmm. As I've just said, the first announcement of the local enterprise partnerships will come in the summer, but hot on its tail will come the next round, because this is a rolling program, and you know, the government is going to be talking about 4 or 5 years of local investments come the end of this year.
Okay. Lord Heseltine, thank you very much. If you haven't read the No Stone Unturned report, then do. I recommend it. There's an awful lot in it. It does leave very few stones unturned. And I suppose what's noticeable about it is that I imagine from your perspective you would quite like to see quite a lot more of those actions, those recommendations embraced with a bit more oomph perhaps.
Oh, I'd like to do another No Stone Unturned, because there are all sorts of things that have occurred to me since I did that.
Okay. Well, maybe AC will fund the next report, I don't know. But no, round of applause, Lord Heseltine, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for your time. Thanks so much.